I never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. My wife, Jessica, and I have been married for almost 10 years. We met at a mutual friend's party, and it was one of those situations where everything just clicked. She was charming, funny, and we were on the same page about almost everything: careers, future, kids. People used to say we were that couple everyone looked up to. Hell, I even believed it myself. Until a few months ago, when everything changed. It all started with these small, almost unnoticeable shifts. Jessica and I had always had a good balance. She worked as a marketing manager, and I run a small landscaping business. Sure, things weren't perfect, but what relationship is? We had our share of disagreements, but nothing major. Or at least I thought so. The first real sign of trouble was when she started staying late at work more often. Jessica's job has its busy seasons, so at first I didn't think much of it. But this time it felt different. She wasn't just coming home late. She was distant. Normally, we'd catch up on our days, joke around, or watch TV together. But lately, she'd walk through the door, mumble something about being tired, and head straight to bed. And then there was the sex, or lack of it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We hadn't had sex in almost 2 months. We'd gone through dry spells before, but this time was different. Whenever I brought it up, she'd brush me off with, "I'm exhausted, Nick. Work is killing me." I tried to be understanding, but in the back of my mind, a little voice kept whispering, "Something's not right." The nagging feeling that something was off kept growing. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that work was really stressing her out. But Jessica's behavior kept getting weirder. Her phone became a permanent attachment to her hand. I'm talking 24/7, like she was afraid to put it down. Before, it'd always just be lying around, on the kitchen counter, on the nightstand, whatever. But now, it was always face down, like she was hiding something. And every time I walked by her while she was texting, she'd quickly lock the screen or flip it over. One night, I casually asked her who she was talking to so much. She rolled her eyes and said, "Just work stuff, Nick. Why are you being so paranoid?" That word, paranoid, hit me hard. I didn't want to be the controlling husband, the one who snoops through his wife's stuff because of some gut feeling. But damn it, that gut feeling wouldn't go away. Jessica's attitude toward me started changing, too. She became snappier, more critical of everything I did. If I didn't load the dishwasher correctly, she'd huff and redo it. If I mentioned going out with some friends, she'd make snide comments about how I always have time for them, but never for her. It felt like she was picking fights just to have an excuse to storm off. I started walking on eggshells around her, trying to avoid setting her off. But the biggest red flag came one Saturday when I asked her if she wanted to spend the day together. Maybe grab lunch, go for a hike, something. Jessica didn't even look up from her phone before saying, "Can't. I have to go into work." Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but something in her tone just screamed bullshit. That night, while Jessica was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the dresser. I know, I shouldn't have looked. But after weeks of feeling like something was wrong, I couldn't help myself. I flipped the phone over, and there was a text from someone named Mike. Now, I didn't know Mike. She'd never mentioned a Mike from work, and after almost 10 years together, I knew most of her coworkers' names. The text was short, "Just can't wait to see you again, winking face." My stomach dropped. I didn't read further, though. I quickly put the phone back exactly as it was and went to the living room, trying to act normal. But my mind was racing. Who the hell was Mike? And why couldn't he wait to see my wife again? The next few days were torture. I tried to act like everything was fine, but it was like I had this gnawing feeling in my chest that wouldn't go away. I kept running different scenarios through my head. Maybe he was innocent. Maybe Mike was just a friend from work, and I was overreacting. But then again, why hadn't she mentioned him before? And why did she act so weird with her phone? I started noticing other things too. Jessica seemed more put together than usual when she went to work. She was wearing makeup every day now, which wasn't typical unless we were going out or had something special planned. She bought new clothes and got her hair done, but when I complimented her, she barely acknowledged it. Instead, she'd brush past me and rush out the door, saying she was late for a meeting. And then there were the business trips. Jessica's company occasionally sent her out of town for client meetings, but these trips had become more frequent. She'd come home and give me vague details about how exhausting it all was, but something didn't sit right. It felt like she was hiding something, but I didn't have proof. At least, not yet. A week later, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. She told me she had a client dinner, and I told her I'd be working late on a landscaping job. After she left, I waited about 30 minutes, then got in my truck and headed to the restaurant she'd mentioned. But when I got there, her car wasn't in the lot. Panic started to set in. I pulled out my phone and tracked her location. Yeah, I know, tracking your spouse is a bad look. But I had her location shared with me ever since we got new phones together last year. She didn't even know I had it set up, and honestly, neither did I until that moment. Her location wasn't anywhere near the restaurant. She was on the other side of town, at some random bar I'd never heard of. I drove there in a daze, feeling like my worst fears were about to be confirmed. And then, when I pulled into the lot, I saw them. Jessica was sitting in a booth with some guy. Tall, dark hair, clean-shaven, probably about my age. She was smiling at him in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. And then, right in front of me, they kissed that I didn't storm in. I didn't make a scene. Honestly, I didn't even know what to do. I just sat there in my truck, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. Jessica was cheating. I drove home that night in a fog, my mind racing. Should I confront her? Should I just leave? The thoughts were swirling around, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let this slide. When Jessica came home later that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for her. She walked in, smiled at me like nothing had happened, and went to hang up her coat. So, how was your client dinner? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She hesitated for a second, but quickly recovered. It was fine. Long, though. I'm exhausted. I nodded, staring at her, my heart pounding. And who's Mike? Jessica froze. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have an immediate answer. Her eyes darted around like she was searching for an explanation, but I didn't give her time to come up with one. I saw you, I said quietly. At the bar. With him. Her face went pale, and her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Finally, she stammered, Nick, it's not what you think. Here's the thing. When you catch someone in a lie, you expect them to own up to it, right? Especially when it's this obvious. But nope, not Jessica. She went into full-on damage control mode. Mike's just a friend, she said, like that explained the kiss I saw. It's nothing serious. We've just been talking because work's been so stressful, and he's been helping me deal with it. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I couldn't believe it. Blowing it out of proportion? I'd literally just seen her making out with the guy. I called her out on the kiss, and she just brushed it off, saying it was a mistake and that she was caught up in the moment. I didn't buy a word of it. Caught up in the moment doesn't explain the weeks of secretive behavior, the late nights, the texts, the lies. I was fuming, and I knew she was still hiding the truth from me. After that confrontation, things were tense between us, but I wasn't ready to give up on our marriage just yet. I know it sounds crazy, but part of me still wanted to believe that we could fix this. We'd been together for almost a decade, and I wasn't ready to throw it all away over one guy, at least not yet. But Jessica didn't seem to share my sense of urgency. She kept telling me I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting, and that nothing was going on with Mike. Every time I tried to talk about it, she'd roll her eyes or sigh dramatically, like I was annoying her by even bringing it up. Meanwhile, I was falling apart. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. My friends noticed something was wrong, but I didn't tell them the full story. I was too embarrassed. What was I supposed to say? Hey guys, my wife's cheating on me, but I'm still hoping we can work things out. I knew I needed more proof, so I started snooping more. I went through her phone every chance I got. It was like an obsession. I found more texts between her and Mike. Ones that made it clear this wasn't just emotional. They'd been meeting up for months. They talked about the times they'd hooked up, the things they did, and how they couldn't wait to see each other again. And then I found the worst thing, a hotel receipt. Jessica had taken a work trip a couple weeks ago, and it turned out Mike had gone with her. They'd spent the weekend together at a hotel, and she'd even charged it to our joint credit card, thinking I wouldn't notice. My stomach churned when I saw it. This wasn't just an affair, it was a full-blown relationship. After finding the hotel receipt, I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I had the evidence now. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid, and I wasn't overreacting. I had cold, hard proof that my wife had been lying to me for months. So, I waited for Jessica to get home from work that evening, just like I had before. I had the receipts sitting on the kitchen table, along with a printed copy of the texts I found between her and Mike. When she walked in, I didn't say a word at first. I just watched her face when she saw everything laid out in front of her. Her eyes widened for a split second, but then she quickly composed herself. "What's this, Nick?" she asked, her voice sharp, but there was a hint of nervousness underneath it. "You tell me," I replied, leaning back in my chair, trying to stay calm, but I was shaking inside. She glanced at the papers, then back at me. "I already told you it's not what you think," she said, crossing her arms defensively. "I'm not having an affair." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was still trying to lie, even with everything right in front of her. "Really, Jess? Not an affair? What do you call sneaking off to hotels with Mike, then? Friendly business meetings." Her face flushed red, and I saw the panic flash across her features. "Okay, fine, I hooked up with him a few times. But it didn't mean anything, Nick. It's not like I love him. That was it. That was the moment everything inside me snapped. You've been sleeping with him for months," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. "You lied to me, over and over again, and you still can't even admit the truth." Jessica didn't back down, though. She raised her voice right back. "You've been so distant for months, Nick. What did you expect me to do? You're never around anymore, always working or hanging out with your friends. You haven't even tried to make an effort with me." I couldn't believe she was turning this around on me. Sure, maybe I hadn't been the perfect husband, but I'd always tried to be there for her, to make things work. And now, she was trying to justify her affair by blaming me, that we went back and forth for what felt like hours, yelling, accusing, and trying to place the blame on each other. Jessica kept insisting that the affair didn't mean anything, that she was just confused and frustrated with our marriage. But nothing she said made me feel any better. In fact, it just made everything worse. "You made a choice," I told her, my voice low and steady. "You chose to cheat. You chose to lie. And you didn't even have the decency to come clean when I gave you the chance." Jessica started to cry at this point, but I wasn't moved by it. Normally, seeing her upset would have made me feel guilty or want to comfort her. But not this time. This time, I was too angry, too hurt, too disgusted to care about her crocodile tears. "I didn't want to hurt you," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to get this far, Nick, I swear." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at that. "Didn't want to hurt me? Jessica, you've been lying to me for months. You've been sneaking around behind my back, meeting up with another guy, and you're telling me you didn't want to hurt me?" She kept crying, trying to justify her actions, but I was done. I couldn't listen to her excuses anymore. That night, I slept on the couch. I couldn't bear to be in the same bed with her. Knowing what I knew, I laid there for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. Every lie, every excuse, every time she made me feel like I was going crazy. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with this overwhelming sadness. I kept asking myself, how did it come to this? How did we go from being happy to this complete disaster? I felt like a fool, like I'd been blind for so long, ignoring the signs and convincing myself that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I thought about all the years we spent together, the vacations, the holidays, the lazy Sundays watching movies on the couch. I thought about the plans we made, the life we built. And now, all of that felt like a lie. The next few days were a blur. Jessica and I barely spoke. She stayed in the guest room, and I did my best to avoid her. Every time I saw her, it just brought the pain rushing back. I felt like I was living in someone else's life, like this couldn't really be happening to me. I started taking longer jobs with my landscaping business, working until late at night, just so I didn't have to come home and face the reality of my crumbling marriage. Eventually, I had to tell someone. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay. I ended up talking to my best friend, Josh, after he noticed I'd been acting off for weeks. We met up for beers, and after a few drinks, I just let it all out. "Jessica's been cheating on me," I said, staring down at my glass, feeling the weight of the words. Josh's reaction was immediate. "What? No way, man. Are you serious?" I nodded, filling him in on everything, Mike, the texts, the hotel. It felt good to finally talk to someone about it, to get it off my chest, but it also made everything feel more real. Saying it out loud made it impossible to deny anymore. My marriage was over. Josh was pissed. Man, I can't believe she'd do that to you. You've always treated her so well. What the hell is she thinking? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what Jessica was thinking, or if she even cared about how much she'd hurt me. All I knew was that the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Eventually, word got out to my family too. My mom called me, worried after hearing from one of my cousins that things weren't going well. I ended up telling her everything too. She was heartbroken for me, but tried to be supportive. "You deserve so much better, Nick," she said. "I know it hurts now, but you're going to get through this." A few weeks passed, and Jessica and I were still living in this weird limbo, avoiding each other as much as possible. But deep down, I knew I couldn't live like that forever. I had to make a decision. One night, after another silent dinner, I finally sat her down. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my heart was pounding. She nodded, looking nervous. "About what?" "About us. About what happens next." There was a long pause before I finally said it. "I think we need to get a divorce." Jessica didn't cry this time. She didn't even seem surprised. She just nodded, like she'd been expecting it. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think you're right." And just like that, it was over. Almost 10 years of marriage, gone in a matter of seconds. We agreed to keep things civil, to split everything amicably. We didn't have kids, so that made things easier, but it didn't make it hurt any less. The divorce process was straightforward, but emotionally, it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. Seeing the papers finalized, seeing her sign her name at the bottom, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of everything we'd built together. After the divorce, I moved out of our house. I couldn't stay there anymore. Too many memories, too much pain. I got a small apartment on the other side of town and started trying to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. I had moments where I'd wake up in the middle of the night, thinking she was still next to me, only to realize she was gone. I'd find myself scrolling through old photos of us, wondering how things had gone so wrong. But slowly, day by day, I started to feel like myself again. I leaned on my friends, went out more, and started focusing on my business. I even started seeing a therapist, which helped me process everything I'd been through. As for Jessica, I don't really know what she's doing now. We don't talk anymore, and honestly, I don't want to. I heard through the grapevine that she and Mike are still seeing each other, but I've tried not to think about it too much. She made her choices, and I'm making mine. Looking back, I've learned a lot from this whole mess. The biggest lesson? Don't ignore the red flags. If something feels off, it probably is. I spent too long trying to convince myself that everything was fine when it wasn't. And in the end, it cost me a lot more than just my marriage. So, to anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, my advice is simple. Trust your gut. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. And don't settle for someone who doesn't respect you enough to be honest. You deserve better.